We wanted to share with you some updates on the formation of the clinical harmonization group. So the objective of this group is to facilitate cross-site and cross-linguistic clinical assessment of thought disorder, speech, and language disturbance. If you were able to attend some of the SIRS symposia, it's an open question out there. I think everyone in this room recognizes how important speech, language, and communication, formal thought disorder are. But how we understand it and how we measure it is still up for debate and still not a settled issue. So as a key step in this process and a key step for collaboration, we need a way of connecting the clinical ratings that have been used, that have been generated by different scales. And in addition to a discourse protocol that harmonizes the way that we collect language, and in addition to methods harmonization, which Nancy brought up previously, we also need a way of harmonizing the way that we measure the clinical constructs that we're putting things up against. So these are our current working group members, but we're very happy to welcome other people who might be inspired or interested when you hear what we're presenting. So we're going to share this in the spirit of openness and collaboration. We're going to collaborate with our colleagues in this talk, in this session. And we're going to invite first Dr. Sriraj to talk about his, so far, I should say, in this working group, we've focused on three main areas. Dr. Sriraj will talk about his work in trying to understand the current landscape of clinical rating scales. And then Dr. Alban Vogel will talk about his work using semantic information from item descriptions to cluster formal thought disorder symptoms. And then finally, Dr. Frederike and I will talk about our plans for data-driven dimensions of formal thought disorder across scales, across languages, and across sites.
Can you use my click and visit it?
No, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So we all know that disorganization of the thought disorder itself has not been given the due importance in the clinical studies as much as the other psychotic symptoms or the positive symptoms or the negative symptoms do get generally, both with respect to the clinical trials or even for the mechanistic aspects. We think one of the major issues behind it is about the measurability, because we need to have a good measurement tool to understand, to go further. And if there's a lack of that, probably that somewhere leads to the issue. And it's not that we don't have scales. We do have many clinical tools, primarily from the descriptive psychopathological background. And when we do have these tools, how do those talk with each other? Like, what's the interchangeability, interoperability of these tools? So there's a question that we had, we discussed in the last Discourse satellite meeting that we had in Toronto. And that's where this activity started. And for that, we initially thought, okay, let's systematically look at, understand what are the different tools which are available in the literature overall, which are used for common thought disorders, which will be rated by clinicians or an interviewer, and which will be applied on patient population and rated by the raters, expert raters, rather than just the self-report tools. And we did get so many tools. Among them, the 13 were the basic tools, which were primarily looking at the form of disorder per se. And there were many other tools like the SANSATs, the BPRS, the SIRATs, which were also looking at the disorganization. They were measuring the form of thought disorders, but they had only few items. They are not specific to the form of thought disorder that we were trying to understand. And once we enlisted all these tools, so we then chose those items which are available, which are required for this purpose. And then we started trying to map them, match item by item, map them of one scale, all the items, and then with each item, what is the relevant item which is there in the other, so that we can look at the interoperability. but there are many issues. So one of the major issues was there were composite items, that is, scales like Panacea has a conceptual discrimination which covers too many features, too many dimensions of formal thought disorder. There were issues like non-matching, where the same terms have been used for a different concept itself, like tangentiality of PLC and PALD does not really match. And there were a few non-related items which were not directly the descriptive part of the formal thought disorder, which we had to remove them. So because of these issues, we thought, okay, let's not just go with item matching, but now we will try to get the features out of it. So a single item can have multiple features, right? So like just the flight of ideas, for example, is made up of too many things. The present speech contains rapidity of speech. It also talks about the amount of speech, the volume, the quantity of the speech, as well as it also talks about the loudness of speech. So we try to get all these features separately and then try to understand, okay, how many of these features are being discussed in each of those scales. And these are the 52 discrete features that we were able to kind of make out, and then we mapped it upon for each scale. So the highest feature that we could get off was drifting off and poverty of speech, which were covered by almost 11 of the total 13 scales. And there were 11 such features which were represented only by one scale, not more than one scale at all. And this is broadly, if we can kind of classify them into positive and negative dimensions. So we can see that there are only few items which are represented in more scales, but most of them have less than the average number among the 13 scales. The average number of items which are the features which are represented in any of the scale was around 3.42. So that was the issue. And then we tried to look at, okay, what are the different scales ability? So how many features each scale are deriving? So then we were able to see that TARL was one thing which had the highest ability to capture the items, like it had 62% of the features. The TLC had 50% of the features, but rest all scales had less than 40% of the features which are kind of identified. So now we have these features. Now we are looking at getting it validated. Try to get back to the experts and try to understand what experts think about it. Are they all these features are really necessary? Are they really part of common thought disorders or not? So we'll be again getting back to all of you guys and getting your response, and then we'll be further fine-tuning these features. And might be if required, you can even add one or two features if experts believe that it's important. And then we are planning to go ahead and try to understand how better we can quantify the common thought disorders. Thank you.
So my piece of this, my work in this working group is basically quite similar to what Frederike just presented, just taking a slightly different tack. Instead of looking at rating skills as they're used in doing literature review and like seeing out like what items overlap by expert raters, we decided to look at using semantic information to look at formal thought disorder. And yeah, basically the context of this is we have a lot of different data sets with different features, with different rating scales. How can we combine this or come to some conceptual construct, and that will help you hopefully in the future to harmonize this all, to basically be able to bring these data sets together or do something useful with them. So with the help of Frederike, we collected 7 scales, 103 items. These are quite often used. We use a subset of items for substance, solids, and ponds, because as Frederike already mentioned, some of these item scales are not related to speech or formal thought disorder at all. And you can immediately see some quantitative features of these rating scales. So how are they described? What do they describe? Some of them are very short. Some, like Klang, for example, are average 14 words per word description. Minimum number is 2, like unnecessary repetition or something like that. And some of them are quite long. If you look at the TLC and the max number, you can see there's 240 words, which is like, okay, that's quite something to read when you want to score a symptom on a patient. And what we did is we used these descriptions of, basically item level descriptions and all these scales. And we use a semantic model familiar to lots of you here, I presume, but I'll just quickly go through it. These models, they learn the context, the semantic content of a semantic meaning behind speech by looking at the context of words, or in our case, the context of sentences. So it was a sentence word embedding. This allows you to compute the distance between semantic concepts. So on the right, you have this, is it on the right? Yeah, it's on the right. A three-dimensional semantic space, which has the axis of sky, engine, and wing. And then you can have a helicopter, goes in the sky and has an engine. And you have the concept of a goose, which goes to the sky and has wings, but it doesn't have an engine. So you can say like, oh, they're similar in the skyness of them. Yeah, so you can then calculate the distance between these become vectors, and you can do basically calculations on them. So what we did is we used the descriptions of the item scales, the meaning that the authors have described and that people are trained in when using these rating scales. And we checked if we could quantify this, basically the description there, and see if you find some patterns. So on the left, you have TLC 9 clanging, and then clang 1. The title of the thing is different, but looking at the description, you can see that some words overlap. For example, both of them have, I think, punning is in both of them. But there's also a lot of non-overlap, but the meaning behind them is quite similar. So if you understand like access phonetic association and clang, yeah, from my description, and hopefully if you understand, if I'm explaining it correctly enough, we would say like there's a similarity. So the novelty here is, and Sriraj, presumably experts, they also rate these are overlapping feature constructs. So what we do is we assign a number to this. So we get a number of 0.744. There's a lot more numbers behind the dot, but not really needed. It's quite high. And on the right, you have something that is not related. So episodic speech and distractible speech. So these also contain a lot of the similar words, but the meaning behind them is quite different behind the construct. So you get a lower sentence similarity. So what we did is we collected these items, we moved some examples, so very specific examples that are unique to a simple scale, and we moved severity level descriptions. I would want to extend this to further to work on it as well, because I think the severity level descriptions usually carry information. So you can see in what type of direction should I think about this disturbance, especially if it's at like a very light level, it might not be so different from other rating skills. We use the sentence level word embedding. And you can see the model here, and the link is on the corner, so you can just download it and run it if you want to. And it produces a 768 length vector embedding for each of these item level descriptions. And then we calculated item to item similarity for all of the 103 rating schemes. So it looks like this. I always, when I make figures like this, I start looking at them and I see the human pattern matching capacity starts to warm up and think like, oh, what do I see? What does it mean? So what I first noticed is that the secondary part of the told, so that's like in the top right corner, and then the second part, it heats up a bit. So these items are internally more similar to each other. And if you look at the clang in the bottom right, you can see that in the second half there, I think these black bars going across. So these items are very different from the other rating scale. It's true, clang is a bit more of a linguistically or phonetically derived scale. So for a total of 103 items, you can see for the puns, it's not so many, it's only 4 items that are, and it's also one of the outcomes already. Like, oh, if you want to use puns for something related to formal plot disorder, you're not going to carry a lot. And it might be enough in like severe cases where you see a change in symptom severity or something like that. But some grading skills, they're quite limited in their scope what you can catch. So you have this nice similarity matrix, if I remember how similar the items are, and you can do all sorts of interesting things with this now. So you can look within scales how similar they are to other scales, but you can also do clustering. So you basically can ask, if we take the backbone of this, and basically what I use is the TLC, a very widely used symptomatologic rating scale for plot disorder. And I asked how similar is each other item to that, and then basically we get these clusters. So you can see that we get similar 4 different clusters that are separated and that things map to each other. So in the far right, you get, I think, yeah, that's far right. You get echolalias and stuff like that. And in the other right, circumstantiality. Basically, this gives us some impression that there are clusters of symptoms, and these are not necessarily, so opposites, for example, are in the same group. So if you have poverty of speech or like flood of speech or pressure of thoughts, it will be related. And it's an idea to basically make some conceptual understanding of what we think about when we use formal plot disorder rating scales, at least what's in their description. So we used experts to ask for their attribution. So we made these 4 rating scales. We made a description of each of them, and we assigned blind without this cluster approach, asked them to say like, hey, here you have the 103 items, give a number 1, 2, 3, 4 on the cluster that they should be into, and compare their responses. And we got a substantial agreement. I should say this is on the edge of substantial agreements. If it was 0.7 lower, it would have been moderate agreement, but we're getting somewhere. And the lowest scoring one was group 2, features, and you can see the description below, abrupt topic shifts in response to stimuli, repeated words or subjects, speech interruptions, and memory lapses recording previous speech. And the wording of these types of items and how we describe these groups as well, it should also like hopefully spark some imagination there, because if you read the rating scales, they use very different words and labels and items for something that can be quite similar, or they use the same words for something that they regard as quite dissimilar, as Frederike already mentioned. So basically, discussion here is that these show a wide range of conceptualizations and wordings. Experts seem to agree on the semantic information derived from the item level descriptions. There is the issue of antonyms. So if you do responses are too slow or responses are too fast, your Bertrand similarity is quite high because it's the same meaning. But this might just throw something that is an underlying concept with problems in speed of responses. So we're thinking about repeating clustering with each scale. So this was the TLC as a backbone. We can also use the TOLD as a backbone. I've actually done some of this already, and also unstructured mappings. So for example, TSME visualizations and minimum spanning trees. So we're also doing those, and the TOLD comes out as one of the backbone items there. And we're also thinking about repeating this with all psychotic symptoms. So for example, anything including hallucinations and stuff like that. It's an interesting intersection in the field of psychiatry where the descriptions and the linguistic or almost literary background of a lot of the scales reflects our clinical understanding of it. And so now we have clinically scored item scales, and we want to pool them, or we want to work together with them, or we want to say like, these are really necessary and these not so much. We decided basically to look at the semantic description of that. So we'll fine tune this. We got the expert raters. I might do 2 or 3 more flusterings, and then we're basically going to put this out somewhere. So thank you for your attention.
Try to get through this in like 5 minutes or so that there's plenty of time. Yeah.
Yes, so I think we'll speed up a bit now to have a great discussion afterwards. So I'm going to present a more data-driven approach to clinical harmonization. Just to guide you briefly through, we have presented a series for those who maybe already attended, 2 studies that were conducted separately from another on factor analyses and dimensions of form of thought disorder across disorders. And these are the results from the study I conducted 2 years ago, where we found a 3-factor model. And then Sunny did another study using a completely different scale. So in mine, we had the sons and subs, and she had the TLC scale, and then also a different language. And both of us found 3 factors. That were in fact quite similar across the 2 studies. And this was basically the basis of the idea we had here for our clinical harmonization group, where we were wondering whether we could use multiple sites and scales to have a data-driven approach across scales and disorders and to extract dimensions. And we have done a inquiry of metadata and asked if there were sites willing to participate in such a study. And what basically came up is that 23 sites or samples from 10 countries with 8 languages were interested in such an approach. And we also have some basic information, but I will just maybe point out the most important stuff. So for such a study, the total sample size would be over 6,000 participants, which is great, including healthy controls, then schizophrenia patients, but also patients with depression and bipolar disorder. And just to show you maybe the top combination of scales we have across sites. We do have, for example, for sons and subs over 3,000, well, almost 4,000 subjects, and then we do have other combinations as well. And the idea would be really to combine the single items of all these scales and then to perform factor analyses across these sites. And I think now Sunny is taking over.
Yeah, so basically the objective of this is to find common latent factors among the scales. So instead of mapping directly from one scale to another, or instead of choosing a single scale to rule them all, we would find, the idea is that perhaps there's a common latent structure so that each individual scale that's already being used at different sites can be mapped to that common single denominator. And so the analysis approach that we've discussed and that we're planning to take, well, first is to get data from everyone. But then we would look at the polycorrelations, so identify items and symptoms that can be collapsed. So where they're already highly collinear. And then we would calculate a pairwise correlation matrix and use random forest imputation to impute missing data where there are some sites who did some, scales, but not others. And then from that, like large pairwise correlation matrix and imputed values, we would run the factor analysis study. So we would do an exploratory analysis. We might look at confirmatory ones, either based off of our own data-driven results, but also potentially based off of Albin's findings and based off of Sriraj's findings. We can use our theoretical understanding to then inform the confirmatory factor analyses as well. And also we would be able to analyze these within subsamples. So different different countries of origin, different languages, different demographic groups, for example. And then our intended outcome is to be able to publish a method so that anyone using any of those factors, those thought disorder scales, would be able to use a formula to calculate these common latent factors, which we can then use as a group to harmonize our clinical measurements. So we've started, Frederike mostly, and I have started putting together the data collection by tools. So certainly this is the variables that we were thinking of collecting from this community. So, some basic demographics and information about the illness. And then we're looking for data where at least 2 different formal thought disorder rating scales have been used, preferably. I think even one would be useful. So you have any data where you used a formal thought disorder related scale, that would be really useful to this project. And we've already worked on a draft data transfer agreement to facilitate this process. So it's based on, I think this was based on Enigma, right?
Yeah.
So it's EU friendly. And so, we're able to share that with anyone who's interested. It's actually already on our shared drive, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So our next steps is to, again, start with data collection. Please help us. And then we'll set up the code for analyses. We'll maybe test some preliminary analyses in smaller samples, and then try to generalize to the overall approach. Yeah. And then, so I wanted to make sure how much more, still 15 minutes, 10, 15. Okay, that was my target. I wanted to leave plenty of time. Thank you.
Congratulate you. You're doing really wonderful work. So thank you from all of us. I have a suggestion for the demographics. It would be wonderful if you could add SES and parental SES. It's just that it's such a strong predictor of general language function and so many other things that certainly any language journal would. Yeah, it's just a suggestion. Both parental as well as SES. And then the other thing is, parental SES includes parental years of education. And also, just in the US, so if you could add a race thing too.
Race.
Race ethnicity, because for all NIH funded projects, we have to report that. I'm just thinking ahead. And also for sex, gender, nowadays, and I agree, as if you could offer, male, female, other, those different choices.
So in fact, that list we have here would be like the minimal information we need from sites, and then using that link, we'll get to a table which is much more detailed than the list we have here. So this would be like necessary information, and then we are assessing already such data. This is planned to have it.
I think one thing we were discussing was to find, so you mentioned SES, which is definitely important. Okay, it's okay. And so, but one thing we were trying to figure out was, since there are many different ways of assessing SES, we needed to figure out like ways that where we would be, you know, where there was data available from as many sites as possible. Probably education is perhaps going to be the most common.
Very good SES scale, send it to you, which it has a whole bunch of, which you just, and it yields a summary score.
If I remember well from the first discussions that we had about this, we have all these items in there as possible, but a lot of these items, the study is already finished and no longer collecting
Yeah,
data. So we're just retroactively looking at what can we get to get the highest number.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll hand over to Nancy. I have a very quick question. Poverty of content, that always confuses me. And then in your follow-ups, and I don't know whether you've got I mean, I just think, I mean, it could, for me, like if someone can talk and they're very circumstantial, you're going everywhere, then that for me is very positive thought disorder, and it's just like an extreme form of derailment. But I noticed that with negative, and I'm just very curious how you see that.
I'm interested in Frederike's as well, but for mine, my analysis, it actually cross-loaded on impoverishment and incoherence, which to me makes a lot of sense. It's a combination of impoverishment and the inability to make that like, within sentence sense.
You wonder whether some of that could be people like me who are just hopelessly confused. Then you might be like, whether you're just getting some people who are writing it or not. Like some people might think, oh, that poverty of content, that means they're not speaking much, and then you've got other people who are different.
Well, we had, for my site, everything was rated by a very small number of coordinators who underwent a lot of training. So we were very clear that they were learned that was not the case for poverty of content of speech.
And I just wondered whether other sites.
Yeah.
Thank you for these presentations, all of them really useful. I have a theoretical question, and I'm sorry I'm playing the role of the linguist here, but that's what
We need one of those.
So if I understand correctly, the features themselves are taken from the scales. And you try to see how they cluster, or also which scales capture more than one features. But my impression when I look at these features is that they are extremely heterogeneous, and some are linguistic, are related to language, and I don't know, flat intonation, they are a bit generic, but they capture something that is definitely language, or weird syntax, so that's also might be considered poor syntax. But then you have flying ideas, slow thoughts, and so probably this contribute to this tight and unclear connection between language and thought that maybe we should try to disentangle at least for the assessment purpose, and then we should have separate instrument and then check the interplay. And related to this, perhaps in the map that you showed, I don't know how stable it's definitely, those clustering were final, but there seems to be some clusters that were more linguistic and other that were more like, what should I say, more thoughts, let's say. So that's thought that I would like to share.
I think it's like almost a replay of why Lena and me started on doing this, because we noticed that the descriptions, they're very heterogeneous, and you have things like metaphor usage, like you have a train of thought.
Yeah.
It's not actually a train going in there, and then you have derailment. And there's nothing going off with what's going off the rails, and there's not even rails, right? So I think Lena also gave a good example of Nancy Andreasen having a PhD in linguistics, and she made like a lot of, or like a literary background, if I remember right, like more like that. So, thanks. And that really colors the field. So if you ask one question, what is formal thought disorder? One of the things you're looking at, like, what's the conceptual order? Like, how should we think about this? Is disorganized behavior part of that? The other way is looking at how people use it. And people use these rating scales and they say, I'm measuring formal thought disorder here. And then we try to map that onto each other, or we try to group something here that means something. And then I can imagine developing a new rating scale where you have like a conceptual strong understanding of that. At the same time, for the clinical harmonization part here, a lot of people are not going to stop using the PALS. So if you want to see how that maps onto other things, we might have to try to look for a backbone or some structure there that's being done. And of course, I think expert ratings are very important. If you look at how the tool was made, like designed, it involved a lot of discussion and looking at historical other rating scales that were around or not, and then seeing what overlaps and what doesn't. And you have a lot of items. Then some of them might not occur very often, but they're like very interesting, like clanging, for example. But you might, if you do a factor analysis, often that's an item dropped because it's so rare. So there's different aspects.
In the end, which one do you suggest to use? If one is.
Well, I'm not a clinician, so this is a very hard question. The best is still hard.
Thank you very much. I mean, I've heard this a few times.
Yes.
That's my question about this. How people have understood these theories and decide what practice we get and what symptoms know practice. The reason I say that is if you look at something like Stein's taps, if you look at items that are related to TLC in many ways, the most good word, Stein's taps are applied along with relating delusion and hallucination. We are human brains. When you see somebody having bizarre illusion, you tend to think they're bizarre. It's very difficult to disembowel these two features. And this may explain why some of your power-based control to PLC looks differently from such. It's hard to control for this. The one that you guys are leading is very important. And somehow some parts should be given process of assessment, the practice of together.
Yeah, Tilo Kircher from Marburg, thanks for your great work and for summarizing this really fantastic effort that's really very timely. I want to make a very different comment. The thing is now that we have all these scales and maybe some novel ratings. The other issue is that all this mathematics might give you a false sense of accuracy, because these scales have to be rated by humans. And particularly if we want to compare different samples across countries and continents, it is very important that the raters understand the same thing. And it's one thing is to define a symptom or an item. The other thing is to really understand what it means. So my suggestion is that we form a group of people here, everybody who is interested, and do a common training of rating these symptoms using online, Zoom or whatever. So that in future studies, everybody knows what is meant by train of thought or derailment or whatever it is. So everybody who is interested, how shall we do that? Meet later. form a group.
Probably we will send out a newsletter after this. And we can have a link or a sign-up sheet for something like that in the newsletter.
Tilo, thank you for volunteering to lead that subgroup. That's okay, you speak very well.
I'm Natalia Jimeno from Valladolid, Spain. I find this person very interesting and very inspiring, also with this new idea. And I would like to say that the effort to study the different items is of course very valuable, but it's also important to compare them with the control group, because maybe language has different aspects, perhaps in certain cultural or certain groups. For example, we have made a study with the control group and we have found a lot of poverty of content and perseveration and strategy also in the control group. So maybe this should be also addressed.
I think we have time for one more question if there is one or point of discussion.
So we, regarding to this, we will investigate all participants that will be available to us. So we will have healthy controls as well, and then schizophrenia patients, and then also major depressive disorder patients. And I think what we plan to do is also regarding the ratings across countries, that we just not only compare it across the different populations we have, but also compare it across different languages and sites, I think also, because I could imagine that.
Diagnoses.
Yeah, doing diagnoses, because I could imagine that, for example, maybe other countries will rate SANS and SAPS or TLC different than, for example, in Germany. I think this could be quite possible, so we will address this as well.
Yeah, very good. I think I maybe just want to sum up rather than moving on to another question. I mean, I think that, you know, we live in a, like, there's platonic ideals only exist on another plane and not in reality. So there's never going to be a perfect way to completely harmonize everything. We can all just do our human best. I think doing training videos and standardizing at least, so it sounds like there's maybe parallel or processes that need to happen. So not only do we need to standardize like how we think of these concepts, but we also need to standardize, as Thilo brought out, like how we measure them in the scales that we have. So coming back to Valentina's question of which scale do we use, I don't think we have a single answer right now. Well, I think what Frederike and I and also our colleagues here are trying to do is to come up with a way to harmonize all the stuff that's already, the years of work that have already been put into this, so that for any good, reasonable scale, if you've done it in a way that's, reliable and is true to how that scale is supposed to be rated, we're hoping to be able to come up with a way to be able to harmonize what you get out of that scale. So it's kind of a two-step process, I think. And I think that's the most realistic way to do it, because convincing the entire field to use a single scale in exactly the same way is probably, Quixote-esque or whatever, like exotic. There you go. Yeah. I think we're supposed to end. Sorry, but please find us.
But maybe just one final remark.
Yeah.
In case you haven't signed up for that study and are interested in, we're still accepting data. We have not started data collection yet. So just let us know if you have data you want to contribute to that. We would be really grateful for that.